is to have about 20 or 30 new assessments of species in different taxonomic groups, showing the new rules, let's say, the new format. But most of the information present in the wiki is the book, the red book that we published in 2008, the same exact information as a starting point for those two. So we hope that, you never know. It could be that mostly these editors plus their friends are the ones who contribute to the wiki, but it could be that it takes off, and we have people in other levels in academia, not academics, contributing as well. So that's what we're hoping for. We're hoping that it really opens to a broader audience than a conventional audience that usually participates in it.
We had a question up front, and then...
Oh yes, that's right.
So I'm Amina Philips from Algeria, working in a national environmental agency on nature conservation. So for sure, I need to thank you for your presentation today, and also yesterday with the lady from the CBS. I forget the name. My question is, I am from one of these countries with these gaps. So I'm here to learn from you how to take contact with formally with your group, or I don't know how we can call you. Because in our country, Algeria now is the biggest country in Africa. So we have in wildlife, for example, there are few people working on wildlife. We have botanists, okay, so we have enough botanists, but they are not focusing now on red lists. Only a few people, okay, so focusing on red lists. And we have just presented a new protected animal list in our country. We are proud about it, but we are still using old data. We know what's going on, but for the official, they don't know. But we would like to have the real reality of our species, plants or animals. So we would like to go to use the red lists, and also with our neighbors, with Tunisia and Morocco. And I am happy you said that you have also trainers in French, because the language is difficult. I know, for example, there are a lot of people from using English language, but in our country, the local people, they are not used to English, and it's like a barrier. The language is like a barrier. I would like if we can have a support to have like training in our country, and how organize ourselves. We are not like in France, when they have this NGOs that are working in their country, or in their in their states, or so we have big country and few people who can working in north part and in general. So how we can organize ourselves to be efficient and work. I have an issue to make a red list in our country. Thank you.
Do either of you want to address that? I mean, I can address that afterwards, but no? Okay. Well, okay, there were a lot of questions there. So, well, first of all, I'd like to congratulate you for what you've already accomplished, and say that building a red list, especially in these countries where there's not a lot of institutional support and there's not a lot of people already on the ground, is really difficult. We can talk afterwards about specifics, but I would say the first step is generally to contact either the IUCN Red List Unit or the National Red List Working Group, and Jonathan is one of the co-chairs for the National Red List Working Group. And the best way to go about doing it is basically to raise funds, which is always the difficult part, and then get a project going. And even if it's not a huge number of people, you can start small, and you can start doing assessments for the species that you have data for. Red listing often then instigates additional field work, and so creating a red list can help generate data. So when you don't have a lot of information, sometimes people think, well, there's no point in doing a red list because we're a country with such a lack of information. But if you can even do a small red list and then highlight the fact that there are lots of species out there that you don't know the status of, then that might motivate people. It's a slow process, but slowly you might get more people saying, well, I know a little bit about this, or I'm interested in this taxonomic group, and so slowly you can start building up information. I would also encourage you to contact the Mediterranean. IUCN has an office in Malaga in Spain, which covers the Med. And
we start to work on something, but not the red list. We're working on targeted species, but not on a red list.
Yeah. Well, that's the first step. I mean, you start small and then you build it up. And the best way to really get a red listing project going is to actually create a project for it. I also think it's important to, if you can, try to get governmental support, because in order to make a long-term, some countries are very successful at keeping a red list going through NGOs. Venezuela is one of them. That really, the process started with people who were interested in doing it, who are both in this room, and then it's been kept going. But particularly if you want to keep the process up and do reassessments over time, if the government can support you financially or with some sort of institutional support, that's really useful.
Hi, I'm Álvaro from Uruguay. I basically have two questions. The first one, I mean, very often people argue that there is not enough data for red list assessment. Of course, it's arguable, but my question is, we often have distribution data, and we can even model create predictive distribution models. And so how reasonable do you think is to base initially at least, a red list on criteria B, basically based on distribution information distribution. And the second question has more to do with the global list, and then when the criteria to identify, when the thresholds to identify different categories in case of population size were initially thought and developed for vertebrates, basically. So how reasonable do you think is to try to start thinking on different thresholds for different groups, taxonomic groups?
Do either of you want to answer that? I can answer. Yeah.
So I could just like to answer on, I'm Caroline Pollock from the IUCN Red List Unit in Cambridge. I just want to reply certainly on your second point about creating different thresholds for different taxonomic groups. The IUCN Red List criteria were...
For sample size, threshold for sample size, in terms of the other criteria, actually may not have any sense to have different thresholds but for different, I mean, it's not the same with sample size of insect population, but sample size of a large normal. So whether specifically for that criteria we should use different thresholds, that's the question.
Different thresholds for sample
population size.
For population size, for actually relating to the different thresholds and the criteria, yes, for different taxonomic groups. Yeah. Well, the criteria were developed initially probably with the larger mammals and the better studied groups in mind, but they were tested and trialled over a vast number of years, involving applying the criteria to a lot of different taxonomic groups, including invertebrates, including fishes, including plants, and a lot of the less studied groups. Through the SSC network, which is over 7,000 members, and also through applying the criteria to more and more country-level assessments, we have had a lot of feedback from these different groups, and we've modified the criteria slightly, and we've also developed a set of guidelines which is now about 80 pages long and is regularly updated, so we have guidelines on how to apply the thresholds to different taxonomic groups. By changing the thresholds for specific groups, it wouldn't really help in the longer term, because when you create a red list, you have to be able to analyse the data across different taxonomic groups, and you have to be able to, if you change the thresholds, then you'd have to modify your analysis to interpret the results from each taxonomic group to make them all comparable. You see what I mean? So it would make the analysis much more complicated to do that. I think perhaps we should maybe talk a bit later on about this in more detail, but it has been sort of tested over time, and I'm afraid we can't change the thresholds in that sense.
Actually, I would just add to that that's one of the reasons that we have, there are 5 different criteria in the IUCN system, and not all of those criteria are going to be applicable to every taxonomic group. Some of those criteria are very dependent on habitat and distribution data, others are dependent on population data. So if you're looking at an insect species with a population size in the hundreds of thousands, you'll never apply criterion, well, you're not likely to apply criterion C or D, because those are based on species with small population sizes. You're more likely to use criteria B for those kinds of creatures, because that's based more on habitat and range size. For other species that are found, marine species, large marine species are found very easily, widely spread across the entire globe. So you wouldn't end up using criterion B because their range sizes are large. But you may end up using some of the population sizes, or criterion A, which is based on population declines. So each of the criteria all apply to different kinds of species with different life histories and different threats that apply to them. And that's why there are so many, and that's why we have this one system that works for any species in any taxonomic group. So, they're in private conversation. One thing that I wanted, just quickly, to come back to your question, the most obvious person for you to talk to is the French National Committee. So do discuss as well, because obviously they had a very successful.
So you are about to translate, you say, all the material you have for to train people. You told me that you're about to translate it into French.
So we have all of our training materials available right now in English, but by the end, well, probably mid next year, we're translating it this year into French and Spanish. So by early next year,
the problem is with these taxonomists, which are absolute specialists, we have lots and lots of reference information already available. They won't come to any training session because they say we did that for 20 years and now they want to change my assessment system. They won't come. It's not only a language barrier, it's also a cultural barrier.
well, a way around it is to bring more people in. I mean, we do this sometimes in the IUCN Red List, where we have the experts with the data, and then we have different people who gather that data that know the Red List system, and then they actually do the assessment.
And you have another opponent, which is the German government, which doesn't accept the IUCN Red List criteria.
Well, that's another issue.
And that's a never-ending battle. So the only way to integrate the data is, as you say, to allow other red list criteria, as you did already.
Well, and on this regional red listing website, it's not only for countries that use the IUCN system. Any country using any system can upload their data, because at the end of the day, for countries that are doing a new red list, then we encourage them to use the IUCN system. But it's not the only system. In lots of countries, the United States is another example, they're never going to change their assessment methodology. So we would still encourage people to communicate and share their data as much as they can.
Tom Locker, I'm from Texas A&M University and also sit on the IUCN Red List Committee. It's a question primarily for John Paul. In the Red List Committee, we've been talking quite a bit about utilizing, making all of the published assessments DOI citable publications. And it has several advantages. One, it will provide a record of past assessments. And the second advantage, of course, is that for those people who are involved in the assessment, it will be a citable publication. And it seems like that would be a particularly useful thing to do with the regional assessments, particularly when you're trying to, and national assessments, when you're trying to bring younger scientists into the process of developing assessments. I don't know if there's been any discussion of having the same sort of policy applied to regional and national red lists to try and have these assigned DOIs as citable publications.
No. No, the two things. Well, first of all, the regional the website doesn't really do assessments. We just bring together assessments. So usually those are already citable publications in the journal. What we're doing with the national red lists of Venezuela is that we use the wiki as a way to capture data, whether we put out a red list. And in those cases, each species assessment has an author. Each chapter has an editor that is credited as that editor. And the whole publication has editors as well. So depending on what you cite, if you cite the whole book, you cite the editors, if you cite a chapter, you cite we give credit to the authors, but it's not as a DOI, not as really as a real electronic publication, just as a book that we can take.
Good afternoon, my name is Jan Plasnik. I'm with the Nature Conservation Agency of the Czech Republic, and I can share some of our experience with developing a national red list. We started because the country was established in 1992 after splitting from former Czechoslovakia. We started in 2001 with coming with new red lists. In the fact, it took 5 years. We assessed all vertebrate species, all vascular species, I guess 8,000 invertebrate species, all macrofungi, macromyceta, all lichens, and all bryophytes. And the experience we raised is that in the fact, although we applied the IUCN regional, the IUCN criteria for regional assessment, as it was said by our German colleagues, I would like very much support the idea to come with some fuzzy approach, because it was very clear, for example, with respect of invertebrates, because I was editor of this book, and remember that we were able even to assess not only subspecies using IUCN criteria, but also, for example, evolutionary linkages. That means something which is known in the US like significant evolution unit, despite the fact whether this is subspecies or something. This linkages was assessed namely in some troublemaking genera like in amphibians. But to be honest, these criteria were very difficult to be applied in some other groups, because they are really perfect for higher vertebrates. But still, namely in invertebrates, we rely very much on expert opinion still. The second information I would like to share with you is that probably the problem is that the more robust criteria are, the less species could be assessed at the national level because lack of data. We can come with the PVA very easily for some species, but for some species the data are not available to do it. And we should seek for some compromise between scientific robust approach and to be, I apologize for this, to be pragmatic. The third experience was that money is really very important, because we funded all these processes from our budget, from the agency, because we were in charge of from Ministry of the Environment, and invertebrate red list was totally funded from the Ministry of the Environment, because there were involved 120 experts for even very specific families. But what is the, let me say, tragedy is that we were in very good collaboration with colleagues and experts and taxonomists from, for example, regional museums, but the problems are colleagues from universities and Academy of Sciences, because they are under horrible pressure with this scientometry to publish in journals with high citation, with high impact factor. And if we wish to have on board with us, we really had to provide them with funds. The next experiment is don't underestimate citizens' hands, because we got a lot of data from citizens, of course, namely on flagship species, but really it was done. And back to the categories, I guess that there will be always some new categories added. I remember that, for example, how to assess some bryophytes or fungi species, which is microspecies, which is cryptic, which has, for example, spora in soil for 10 years, So we had to introduce new category disappearing. Again, like in the past, that means species is disappearing, but probably it will appear sometimes. But at this moment there is no knowledge. Yeah? And my last comment will be with the fact that we were lucky to really provide the authors, because together it was more than 200 authors and experts involved, with the idea and the information that the data will be used, the red list, because fortunately within our act on environment impact assessment and strategic environment impact assessment, there's a necessity to come with a list of red list species occurring on the very specific territory or area where EA will be applied. And on the other hand, for example, when the Ministry of the Environment is paying, for example, NGOs for conservation measures, among priorities there are red lists. That means we can offer the authors something and to provide them with the information that their efforts will not be hidden somewhere but will be applied in practice.